In this video, we are going to learn how to simplify rational expressions that involve quadratic expressions. Let's dive right into it. So if you haven't already done it, you should watch the videos on what rational expressions are and how to simplify the simpler forms of them with greatest common factors first before diving into this. Also, if you're not so hot when you're watching this at factoring, and you're like, whoa, I need a review on factoring, check out my Algebra 1 videos, right, in Chapter 9, all about factoring trinomials and quadratic expressions. You need to be very good at that first before you can rock this. Let's do it. So, when we look to simplify this down, the first thing that I think screams at us is we can factor the numerator and denominator using our skills of factoring quadratic expressions. Now, I'm not going to go over how to do that. As I said, that's in earlier videos. But this should scream to us, I can factor. So, I look up at the numerator first and I factor it. Our instructions are to simplify and then list excluded values. We'll get to the listing excluded values shortly. X squared minus 4. Well, we're saying what numbers multiply to give us 4, but combine to give us 0 for the x term, because it's 0x, and that would be x minus 2 and x plus 2. And that's because negative 2 and 2 added together gives us 0x, and multiplied together gives us minus 4. All over, let's factor the denominator. So just factor the numerator and denominator separately. Treat them as separate problems at first. The denominator, what numbers multiply to 20 that add to 12? 2 and 10 are pretty good there. So I've got x, and then I'm going to add 2, add 10. That would multiply to give us 20 and add to give us 12. Nice. Now before we go dividing out factors, always notice what makes the denominator 0. What x values make the denominator 0 is another way of answering listing those excluded values. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to do that mentally. If x is negative 2, negative 2 plus 2 would give us 0. Ooh, I just wrote down the last number I said out loud. Negative 2 is the x value, right, that we don't want it to equal. So can't equal negative 2. And then negative 10 plus 10 would make it 0. So x can't equal negative 10. So those are our excluded values. Now all we have left to do is just divide out common factors. Now be very careful. We are not dividing out x's, we're not dividing out 2's. We're dividing out the entire group that is this entire number here. So it's x plus 2 and x plus 2 are the two factors, and both of them divide out and equal out to 1. So you technically have 1 times x minus 2, which is x minus 2 in the numerator, and 1 times x plus 10. And that is our simplified version. So what does this mean? This means that this is equal to that expression, except when x is negative 2 or negative 10. Then they're not equal. So basically, if you had to plug numbers into this expression, like the number 22, I'd much rather plug 22 into this than into that. And since this is equal to that, it's the simplified version. That's the whole purpose of learning this technique. But again, list those excluded values. Another thing too, we can't divide x by x, right? That would violate the order of operations. We would subtract 2 from x first, add 10 to x, and then see what we have, and then divide numerator and denominator. Here we have everything being multiplied, which is why we can divide out. That is very important. So this does not simplify to 1. Very important. Okay, so letter B, let's factor away. So we'll factor the numerator and denominator. The numerator, we're saying what multiplies, right, by itself, well, together to give us 30 and combined to give us negative 11. Well, those factors would be x, let's see, I believe it'd be minus 6 and minus 5, because negative 6 times negative 5 is positive 30. Add them together, you get negative 11. All over, now in the denominator, we have a greatest common factor. You should always be looking for that greatest common factor. That would be 2x times, x would give us 2x squared, minus 2 times 5 would give us 10, and the x is already there. Oh, we see what's going to be dividing out, but hold your horses. What are our listed excluded values? Well, x cannot equal to, well, if x is equal to 0, that would make the denominator 0. Don't forget, if there's a lone x could take on the value of 0. That would make everything 0. And x equaling 5, because 5 minus 5 equals 0 would be a problem. Now we can divide out factors. X minus 5 divides with x minus 5, leaving us with 1. Nothing else divides out. These x's don't. We have subtraction up here. So you're left with x minus 6 in the numerator times 1 is itself, x minus 6, and then 2x times the 1 that's now there. And again, This whole thing divided by 2x is what we have, but x can't equal 0 or 5. All right, here we go. Another practice problem. So we've got 2x squared minus 11x minus 5 all over 1 minus 4x squared. Now this is just a little tip that you don't have to follow, but I think it'll save you a lot of time. Whenever I have a leading term that has a negative in front of it, I factor out a -1. It just makes life easier for me. So the first thing I'm going to do is leave the numerator exactly the same. We'll deal with factoring that shortly. And now the denominator, I'm going to factor -1 out of it, and that gives me 4x squared minus 1. It flips the signs because -1 times 4x squared is -4x squared. -1 times -1 is +1. Now I go about factoring as normal. And again, if you're having trouble with factoring, go back, watch my videos in chapter 9 of how to factor things of the form where a is greater than 1. It's a little nastier. Okay, so now the factors in the numerator, let's see. Well, we know we're going to need 2x and x. That's going to give us 2x squared. There's only a couple numbers that can multiply to 5, and I know I need 11, so I'm going to put the 5 here and the 1 there. 5 times 2 is 10x. 1 times x is x. Let's see if that's going to factor. You know what? I don't think that's going to factor there. I think I messed up my signs just a little bit. I'm going to make this, shh, don't tell anybody, a +1. So I'll make that a plus there instead. That's going to allow us to do it. So now it's -5 and -1. That's minus 10x, and minus x is minus 11x. Sweet. Okay, so now I'll factor out the denominator. The -1's still there. 4x squared minus 1 is a difference of 2 squares. We're going to have 2x and 2x. And then in order to have no x term, we'd have to have the same values here and here, but with opposite signs. 2x and minus 2x would add together to give you no x term. All right, we're in good shape. So now let's find our excluded values. Let's do it. So excluded value-wise, we just now need to set each of these equal to 0. Not as easy mental math-wise, so I'll do it out. So we're trying to figure out what would make the denominator 0 by setting our x terms equal to 0. Add 1 to both sides, and then divide by 2. So x equals 1/2 would make the denominator 0. Subtract 1 from both sides, and then divide by 2. So -1/2. So now we have our excluded value. So x cannot equal plus or minus 1/2. Those would be issues. But now we can divide out. We have 2x minus 1 and 2x minus 1. They divide out. And they leave us with our terms, x minus our expressions. In the numerators, x minus 5 over negative times 2x plus 1. You can just leave it as a minus sign. But remember, x can't take on those values. It could take on any other values. So again, you're looking to factor the numerator and denominator. You're looking for factors to be the same, but you're dividing out the entirety of the factor, not single variables like we talked about how that could be a mistake. Always list out the excluded values before you divide out, just so that you don't get down to this answer and think your only answer for the excluded value is -10. And remember, the excluded value is where the denominator is 0. I'll do a second video on this just to do 2 more quick examples to give you a little more practice. See you there.